Hi, my name is Bruce Bolger, and I'm founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, and perhaps the world's only organization dedicated to the implementation and measurement of stakeholder engagement. And what does that mean? That means harmonizing the interests of all of your employees, customers, non-sales employees, salespeople, channel, whatever it is, engaging them in your purpose, goals, and objectives and values of an organization. And as part of this process, we give away a lot of information because we have great people like our panelists today who are willing to share their time and expertise with you to help improve the practices of your organizations when it comes to people management. Because let's face it, it's not taught in schools. And that's part of the problem. So today we have Darwin Hanson. He's CEO of a compensation firm and a human capital analytics firm known as Talent Management Evolution. And he's also now CEO of the International Center for Enterprise Engagement, of which he is now the principal. And that is an organization specifically dedicated to measuring the impact of engagement efforts and also the application of total quality management principles to engagement. Michael Levy, he is CEO and founder of Work Proud and also a not only a recognition firm, but a technology firm as well. And he'll have a chance to tell you directly what he does. And he's talking today from the perspective of recognition. We've got Dr. Paul White. He is CEO and founder of Appreciation at Work, and I think I'm the only one who calls him the apostle of appreciation. But if anyone has earned that title, he has, with his book now selling 4,000 books a month, as I last understood it, in what, 25 languages, Paul?
Right.
In 38 countries. I mean, so he has really developed a system for the implementation of appreciation, and you'll see the relevance of that in a minute. I do always want to thank our sponsors, and one of them is Partners for Incentives, and they are a company that provides technology and solutions to companies, but only through third-party solution providers. So Paul and Darwin's company, pardon me, Michael's company, they deal directly with corporations. This company actually brings services like those of Paul's and Michael's to their clients because they only sell through different types of marketing and human resources agencies. And finally, just to remind everybody, the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, we're the how-to organization of stakeholder engagement. We give away a bunch of information. You never have to join or do anything. Media properties, marketplaces, books, research, everything you can imagine related to stakeholder engagement, and a lot of it is for free. So I'm now going to stop the share here, and I'm going to start with you, Paul. First off, quickly tell us what you guys do and the value that you create through appreciation for organizations.
Sure. So I had the opportunity to co-author a book called The Five Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace with Dr. Gary Chapman, who's best known for writing the five love languages. And so we took the love languages and applied them to work-based relationships in the terms of appreciation. We have an online assessment that identifies how each person likes to be shown appreciation and can create a group profile for teams and have training available both from our team, but also an online train the trainer course. And the goal is to help team members, not just executives, managers, supervisors, but team members learn how to communicate authentic appreciation to one another in the ways that are meaningful to the recipient. Lots of times we share appreciation, but it's in the way that it's meaningful to us and it doesn't really hit the mark for the recipient. And so we do that and help uh, both large multinational organizations, government agencies, schools, hospitals, small nonprofits, family-owned businesses implement that. And what we found is that when people feel truly valued, and not just for performance, but also for who they are as a person, that a lot of positive benefits happen to the organization. Good research shows that uh, uh, attendance, people don't call in sick as frequently. You have um, better retention. People don't leave. And actually getting work done and profitability increases as well. So that's sort of what we're about.
Well, great. And we're going to talk more about that. Michael, tell us about Work Proud and the value you create for your clients.
Hey, Bruce, thanks. Paul, good to be with you and Darwin. And for those that are listening at home or wherever you find this, appreciate your interest in it. Bruce, great that you're taking some lead and initiative to look at some of the metrics associated with this. I think you made a great opening point that says this is not a topic that's studied at school. If you consider industrial relations and the areas that it covers, then versus now and what's needed, employee experiences are really important, irrespective of some of the macro, trends that may be impacting the US economy now. There's always macro trends, but at the individual micro levels, a person, people join a company for various reasons, pay and benefits and career objectives, and then they stay there because of how they feel about the people they work with, the things that they do, the opportunities that are in front of them, the role and value and meaning of what the company actually does. Right? And it is with companies with positive sort of individual sense of appreciation at the individual contributor level, and companies that are able to articulate their purpose and value that they provide to greater society, that are the companies that tend to do the best financially, at least when you look at public traded companies. Some 22 years ago, I got involved in the business of rewards as a series of unintended consequences, or right place and right time. During the course of that period, built hundreds of different types of programs for companies, with a large portion of those being internal employee facing. Over the period of time, 22 years, if you think back, the emergence of social media tools came to be, the evolution of the smartphones, Apple, and then of course the various Android versions, and now they're a key core part of our framework, even to the point where we communicate with our children and family members through devices, and social media is sort of what people spend some portion of their time each day. So we took it upon ourselves, over the course of a decade, learned from our clients, had some, great clients that were contributors to from an ideation and execution standpoint. And with WorkProud, built a platform that is a little like Instagram, a little like Facebook, a little like various other social media platforms that people are familiar with, but turned it into a tool that a company could develop their own, with their own branding and identity and mission and vision and values, and try and sort of marry the power of social media with the importance of building an internal employer brand to then communicate what Paul's talking about. And that is, how do you do appreciation? And certainly it can't all be electronic, but it is certainly a progressively greater and more important role, because distributed workplaces, it's in everybody's pocket. It's the way that our younger generation, have grown up, is part of our day-to-day life. In fact, you just have to look at LinkedIn and you look at all the executives posting and what they're really posting about. Well, they're all doing. I'm like, companies should have their own internal versions of that. So that's the background and the history, and appreciate the opportunity, Bruce, for inviting me with these esteemed guests.
Well, and here's what's interesting. And this is why we started this session. And this is why Darwin is going to be focusing so much on impact. It turns out that what you gentlemen do, appreciation and, and pride, can actually improve a company's stock price over time. And this has been verified by the most illustrious people to do such a thing. And that's a guy named Dan Ariely. He's a behavioral economist at, I believe they pronounce it Fuqua Business School. You can easily make that one wrong, so I'll just say that at Duke. But the point is that they took 183,000 data points over 10 years and have constructed a formula that is predictive of future equity value creation. And it has been proven because it's been used as the foundation for an exchange traded fund called Happy. And it has outperformed the S&P 500, which only about 65, pardon me, I think in the first year, maybe 65% of hedge fund people can outperform the S&P 500. But by year two, it's down to 35%. And by year three, it's down to about 5. This has consistently outperformed the S&P 500 for 13 years. And they did it retroactively, but to test it. But the ETF began 2 years ago, and there's several other ETFs that are based on similar metrics. They outperform the S&P 500. Now, a quick question, Michael and Paul and Darwin. How many CEOs do you think know that?
5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what does that mean? A lot of value is being left at the table, obviously, if companies aren't focusing on it. So, Darwin, your expertise over the last, 20 years or so has been in compensation, helping companies develop compensation strategies. And then on top of that, you have developed a really powerful technology that helps any company go in and correlate investments, right? You can actually, how much did I spend on Paul's work, right? And then what was my turnover rate? What was my cost of turnover? What was the cost of replacement? What was the productivity of my employees? And we'll get into impact metrics later. But in your many, many years of experience, how often do you think you've seen evidence that CEOs understand the strategic value created by their employees?
Not very often. They generally are looking for an easy button to handle this complaint that they have that says we need this program or we need that program, rather than looking at it from a holistic standpoint and saying, what's going to be the result of this, or what is the result of the programs that we have already? How is this new program going to impact those results? Are they going to be better, or is it not going to make a difference? They don't see that. They're just pushing the easy button, finding somebody that sells them the right products, and then they just buy them and think that it's all going to be good because of it. And they don't take this holistic approach to looking at the impact of that program and what that program means for them. And
Now, Michael,
part of
the
that
irony
really,
of this. Oh, sorry, did I interrupt you?
yeah, I was just going to say the real impact of that is that they don't look at the various programs that they have and focus on the programs that are doing the best job for them. So they're not looking at the retention in terms of what is causing the retention. What they're doing is they're looking at a particular product saying, oh, I like that person, so I'm going to use their product. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, you got to like the person, but I got to tell you, if that product is not producing the results you're looking for, you're probably using the wrong product.
So, Michael, on average over the years, how much interest do you see clients expressing in really understanding the impact of pride? Because, by the way, the research shows, I forgot to mention this, the human capital factor, it's called. And by the way, it's available. Companies can use it themselves. It's a survey tool. And it's what makes it unique as a survey tool. And I'm not plugging it, but what makes it is that it actually predictive of future equity value creation. And I think CEOs usually gets their attention. But this is good news for you, Michael and Paul. The two of the key factors identified with creating that impact are recognition and appreciation. And we'll talk about the difference between those two in a minute. Even though we're talking about impact, it's an important distinction. But before we do that, Michael, and then I'm going to ask you, Paul, how many of your clients are rigorous in really analyzing the impact of having a more prideful organization? Not just, oh, how many people used the platform, how many people gave each other gifts, how many people did a thing versus what was the true impact. And we'll discuss how to measure the impact in this session. But Michael, in general, how much interest do you see in that?
So I think to Darwin's point, there is an desire by leadership to build an organization where the culture is around individuals who are proud of what they do and proud of the company. I think if you asked any CEO, they want that. The question goes, by the time it's translated through the various sort of mechanisms or the machinery of the organization, and it eventually gets given to a group that says, here's your project. By the time it gets to that stage, it's, hey, can you find a company that does some technology and has some points and some prizes and some recognitions and some service awards? And the overarching objectives have been lost and diluted down. So the core reason for the companies to spend the money, and in some cases they spend quite a lot of money, gets lost along the way. And the measurement yardstick goes, well, I wasn't really briefed to develop a program to inspire, pride and satisfaction. I was given a task to find a technology platform that kind of works and has points and prizes. So I just measure my points and prizes, and I'm feeling like I'm doing a good job. So it's the challenge between the strategic objective and vision of why are we doing this, and to Darwin's point, why are we investing money in programs, to the conversion of some tactical execution, and then the measure of the tactical execution, whereby the initial objective has sort of been lost or diluted along the way. And that sort of explains, at least to me in the 20 odd years doing this, watching all of our clients, the original ideas of why they're doing it and what the justification was converted down to what they actually do, and who you're working with on the client side is usually highly tactical. They're doing great, meaning they're doing the best they can with the tactical objectives, but they're disconnected with to the strategic objective of, well, why did we do this tactical execution? What was the purpose of it, and how do we measure it?
And Paul, is there evidence? Now, you have a very unique business in that because of your business model, you might be hired by a small team at Microsoft working out in Tacoma and they just bring you in to enhance culture, and they're not obviously putting impact metrics on it. But you've been in this business a long time, and you're on LinkedIn. Both of you, I believe, follow LinkedIn, and I never see anybody talking about impact. I always hear, oh, it's going to improve your turnover or this or that, but no one ever, ever, ever that I see says, well, here's the real impact. Paul, in the case of culture, isn't it kind of a warm and fuzzy for many companies where, they're not really doing it for impact? They kind of hope there is. But what's your view on this whole impact issue?
Yeah, I was thinking about it with the kind of feedback that we get from whether it's the HR person or leadership or supervisor that views our stuff is, they report, okay, um, there's less conflict, there's less complaining. It seems like, turnover's less, morale's improved. I mean, but it's sort of just these soft observations. The one piece that they do measure is their employee engagement survey annually, like the Gallup 12, or if they have an internal one. And that's actually often why people get to us, is because they've worked on those. And the one thing there's an item on most of them about appreciation, and they can't get that to move. And so they look at that, but that's about the singular objective measure that they use. And in fact, I've had companies that have used our materials, implemented it, and then, over time it sort of goes away. I mean, it's not as much a focus, and they see that employee engagement survey results, and they say, oh, we need to get back to that. And so I would say that would be the single measure that's used the most.
And by the way, before I move to you, Darwin, on this, we just had somebody who logged off and who said that who needs to see four white males? Okay. And my answer to anybody who says that, first off, we are gender and colorblind here. We send out invitations to our experts, and I don't care whether they're green, yellow, trans, whatever. But on the end of the day, I am not going to change the configuration of a program to ensure some sort of diversity, because otherwise I'd have a spiked young lady here from Greenwich Village and a heroin addict from the Upper West Side. So let's stop this kind of nonsense. I am not going to ever give in to pressures to make our panels demographically representative. A good riddance to people like that think that way. I'm not going down that road. So anyway, Darwin, to your point, getting back to impact, do you see any, what do you think is the reasons why CEOs don't understand what Dan Ariely is showing us? I don't, it's something that Mike, is this taught anywhere? Do CEOs even understand that that, that this is 80% of your balance sheet, 50% of your costs, and you're not measuring it? What am I missing?
Well, um, when we bring them products, we don't bring them the results. We talk about results like Paul said, we're talking about the results of changing a number in a survey. We want to increase or modify that survey number. Well, that really doesn't get to that CEO's concept of he's trying to fix the bottom line. He's trying to change the bottom line. He's trying to make the company more profitable. Um, we're not providing the metrics that say, okay, here's what the impact of this program really is to the bottom line. We're not looking at the human capital ROI. We're not looking at the value add from this program. We're looking at, a number on a survey. And the only really way to modify that is to take the survey over again and to see if it's changed. Well, those surveys are great and they do offer some good value, but they can be a little intimidating to the employees as well. The employee looks at it and says, well, is this survey going to be anonymous? And they say, oh, yes, absolutely. Nobody ever knows about your answers to these. And they go, okay, great. And then they don't do it. And then somebody calls them up and says, hey, you didn't do your survey. Well, okay, now you're tracking it and you know that I've completed it and you know how I've completed it. So, they're going to put the same number they put in last time because last time they didn't get any feedback from the number they put in. So, no employee is going to want to point themselves out as somebody to be left behind in the organization. They're just not going to do that. So the survey itself is good, but it doesn't provide the end all answer for the CEO. What the CEO really needs is they need an impact at the bottom line to say, hey, this is going to cost you, this is going to save you, this is going to produce value here. So that's really what they're looking for. And when they don't get that, they're just, the warm and fuzzy that you talked about, that's going to appease them for a while. And once they start learning and understanding that there's actually a bottom line impact to the programs, then they can start saying, oh, well, obviously I got to have that. I do want my stock to appreciate by 4% a year over the next 100 years. Yeah, I do want that. So, that focus is just not there yet. And I think that's where we're missing it. And that's where, the analytics that I do helps provide them with that type of information so they can understand their programs and the value their programs create for them. Because all these programs do create value. They do create value for them. I mean, you need these types of programs, but you need the right programs for the right part of the organization. And not having the metrics doesn't help you find that answer.
If I can add something,
Please.
Darwin, to your just comment briefly, Bruce, is that if the briefs included some metrics, so the strategic elements were not lost, as the initiative gets passed down to the tactical execution level, then it would help all parties stay aligned and ask themselves questions at the beginning of the project. Hey, let's just remember, we have these two metrics, we're trying to look at. So let's make sure when we're designing the elements, they are with those metrics in mind, and that we're thinking through how a reporting mechanism will work. And once we have that in place and the program operational, it will be that those metrics can change over time, for the programs don't necessarily need to be, static, particularly these kinds of experiential appreciation, emotional, drivers, which is what we're trying to get to with, Paul's work, etc. It's that the blind spot, Darwin and Bruce, is, dimensional human beings that we are, benefits and pay are important, and we can quite well measure those. Not really that well, but whatever, quite well. It's this emotional state that becomes more difficult to get our hands around, of what to expect from it. But it's so impactful because one only needs to look at ourselves in the mirror and see the emotional dimensions that make us all up, and that decision that we make each day to apply our discretionary effort. That's the one that I keep focusing on. It's just hard to measure. But anyway, I apologize. I stepped in.
No, that's exactly what we wanted you to address. So in a sense, do you think, Michael, that the mid-level clients that sometimes you might be dealing with, they don't even have the data themselves? They may not even have the access to some. We're going to get into some of those impact metrics, but I sometimes wonder, and Paul, when you're dealing with people, are they always have the full grasp on they don't themselves know to measure in terms of impact, do they oftentimes?
No, I would say not. I mean, I think uh, to I'm a straightforward Midwestern, so I'll just say what I think. I mean, lots of times the people that we work with have been tasked by organizational leadership to do something, and they're often HR or personnel people, and they don't have the background or knowledge of some of the measures and statistics they can find. The other thing that I think plays a part here is that, if you follow even in the headlines of research, it's like employee engagement's at a 10-year low, and turnovers high and so forth. Well, if I'm an HR manager, I don't know if I want to measure it. I mean, there's a fear about, I've got to get my budget again for our recognition rewards program. And I don't want to point out or find out that it's not working, because that doesn't look good for me. So I think, from an individual self-protection point of view, there's fear about looking at it honestly.
Darwin, I think there's a lot of potential truth there, isn't there?
Yes.
That in a sense, because the research also shows, this gets back to the holistic point. And that's why we talk about total quality management being applied to people. What did we learn from total quality management? We learned and most of the viewers here are too young to know, back in the 80s, our quality was horrendous in this country, and the Japanese came in using total quality management, which involves people all the way to knock our socks off. And to this day, there's not one US company on the top Consumer Reports list of quality cars, not one in terms of reliability. And the Japanese just continue to knock our socks off on that. So, Darwin, I think really the problem does get down to that the CEO does not understand that this has a concrete impact. And what is the significance of that? That means that Michael and Paul, everything you guys do for your clients is viewed as a cost, right? Is it viewed as an investment, or is it viewed as a cost? And if they can't measure it, it's an expense. If it's an investment that can be measured, it gets a whole different approach. Darwin, I'm onto something here, that basically the things these gentlemen sell, even though they create tangible value if done properly, are basically treated as a cost.
Absolutely. Every year they look at that as a cost, and every year they say, oh, this is costing us. But they don't look at it as an investment. They don't look at it as a what are we getting for this money? Yes, it does cost money to put these programs in, no doubt about it. But there's a huge amount of value that comes out of these programs. And that part really isn't presented. It isn't tracked most of the time. I mean, it's interesting that throughout our cycles, I guess, a history of cycles of work, that we have this job called a compensation job. And these compensation folks look at only base pay and maybe bonuses. They don't look at anything else. So that they're all focused in on that. So we have in our history now, we've kind of come to the next part of the cycle, and that is we call this people total rewards experts. Well, really, they haven't changed a whole lot. They're still doing comp and benefits, but they're adding other things like, well, HRIS, payroll. And it's like, well, okay, what about total rewards being a holistic approach to all the rewards that you're paying, and then understanding what those rewards look like, and what are those rewards gaining the organization, and how are they're working well for the organization, and we just don't do that. We just haven't got there yet.
So,
go ahead,
if
Michael.
I may, Darwin, we were so uninspired by the absence of data, in this area, that we took it upon ourselves to hire a gentleman, Dr. Rick Garlick, to produce a study on this called the Work Proud Study. It's available. If people would like a copy, you can ask Bruce Bolger. He'll get you a copy.
Yep.
And, the study was trying to determine what are the drivers of pride, firstly, of which appreciation was a key, if not arguably one of the most important ones. What makes you proud of what you do is either self-generated internally or externally generated, and that is people noticing and appreciating you. Sort of makes sense. What you do matters. I see you. You count. You're making a contribution. And, of course, there's the internal ones. But then taking that to external factors, the research that Dr. Rick Garlick did asked questions around a whole set of variables. One very important one relative to this in your compensation comment was, pay satisfaction. And the question says, even if I were offered significantly more money, I would still want to stay at my current company. And the results were the correlation. If you demonstrated a high sense of individual and company pride, you were 32% likely to stay. And if you were low company pride and you weren't inspired, 2%, with a 15 times delta. So the impact of people's emotional sense of value and contribution within an organization impacting pay and compensation directly is obvious. And of course, the data supports it. And so then the question goes, well, is that measurable? Now it becomes difficult to measure from a standpoint of, would we modify our compensation strategies if we felt we had high levels of company pride? The answer to the CEO would be, if you have very low company pride and people are not inspired and you start fiddling around with their compensation, you may be playing with fire with turnover rates. If, however, you had high levels of company pride, you may be in a place where you can be a bit more creative around compensation strategies. And to Bruce's early point, given the cost of running, global organizations, particularly US service-based businesses, is so heavily skewed towards human beings, less manufacturing, more services, so very human-based, then you've got massive dollars we're talking about and massive result impacts of making compensation, annual adjustments, et cetera, to the organization. So there's a lot in there and available, and opportunities is how I would, sort of phrase this for CEOs, particularly with big sort of, HR expense lines, to go, you can do a lot and impact people's sense of, satisfaction, impact their discretionary efforts, and produce, bottom line results that can impact your current year's financial performance. You're going to need to do it carefully and with data and watching it and with a good comp team, as your partners in it. But to all of our points, don't underestimate the power and influence of people's emotional state and the correlation between that and comp.
And the
Yeah,
fact is, that's what's been proven by irrational capital, Paul.
yeah, I was just going to add that as a psychologist, I think, okay, we're people, organizations aren't measuring this. There's value. And so it's why not? And I was going to say, even though we're talking about data, Dan Ariely, in his book, Predictably Irrational, wonderful job. Said, and psychologists, we sort of discover the obvious sometimes, but it's that people make decisions more on the base of emotional state than they do on facts. And so in thinking about this, of trying to move the industry forward, I think we have to look at that. I mean, that there's got to be baseline data and facts, but what are the barriers, the either identity barriers, the emotional barriers, the effort barriers that are there, and how can we lower the threshold to make that step? I think is an important question. And part of that is that we bring potentially the tools or solutions to them versus them having to go research it, right? But we bring it to them and give them choice, right? A choice is an important human element, that we don't just say, here it is, but say, here are these different factors, which of these are important to you? So I'm just sort of riffing off of what you all are saying. And okay, how do we move this forward?
Well, the good news is you guys are actually part of our impact committee, as you may recall, and the Enterprise Engagement Alliance folks is developing a it will be free to everybody, set of guidelines on how to measure impacts of various types of engagement efforts, because that's the only way to turn this from a cost center into a profit center, which it should be. Before we get into the final elements of metrics and impact metrics, I do want to stop for a moment since we have two experts on appreciation and recognition. Paul, what's the difference? And Michael, I would like you to add into this too, but starting with you, Paul, there is a difference between appreciation and recognition that I think is overlooked. Could you kind of explain it from your point of view, Paul?
Yeah, how we frame it, and it's our framing. I don't know that's the ultimate truth, but that appreciation really is person to person. And it is not based on an org chart, because you can appreciate somebody that doesn't report to you. It can be a colleague, it can be somebody from another department that's helped you out with something. It can go up the organizational ladder, if you will. And it's not just about performance. Yes, we want people to do their job well and do the things right, and we want to acknowledge those. I think appreciation and recognition overlap, but that, and we hear this more and more from younger generational employees, they want to be acknowledged for who they are as a person. And, there are things about us, qualities about us that don't really show up in our performance review. I mean, I tend to like to work with cheerful people more than grumpy people. And even though the grumpy person may be more productive, I may choose, somebody that's easier to get along with. And so it's both the issue of not solely about performance and even work-related things. I mean, you can appreciate somebody who's just a great parent, and you just see that when you in social interactions, or they have the discipline to train for a marathon and that kind of thing. So it's about the person, and it is person to person, which frees up a lot of energy because and as a result, we focus on teaching team members how to show appreciation to one another, not just managers and supervisors.
So, Michael, it would seem to me that in the recognition area, it's more about not just who you are. Maybe this young lady took off time to take care of her mother in hospice, and we recognize the great things that she did for her mom while she kept up her job. It's not for performance, but Michael, isn't the opportunity with recognition to be more specific in terms of aligning it with organizational purpose, goals, objectives, and values, so that it's okay, Michael, you did a hell of a great job. Thank you. Bang. Is there a important distinction there between appreciating people as a human being and performance?
I think, my perspective is all of those are important dimensions. The nuances between what recognition and appreciation is whether you're celebrating the individual and the things that are happening around that individual that inspire that individual, or you're celebrating individual or groups or teams or departments or companies for performance contributions. They are all emotional dimensions that inspire people one way, shape, or another. The first question to ask is, do the people who work for your company want to go to work and give their best when they wake up in the morning? Or are they thinking, I get paid poorly, I don't like the people that I work with, and I'm just waiting for the opportunity to be out the door? There's the first step. The second is, do I have any means by which I can measure activities around trying to be positive and bring a positive dimension to the workplace environment? Because without that ability to have, and thus the importance of sort of well-designed platforms are going to encourage people to use it, and they're going to allow for the organization to see whether it's being used or not used. Once you get to a stage where it is being used, and generally speaking, the direction is positive, either at the individual contributor level, at a personal level, at a business outcomes level, then you begin to refine focuses of it. Hey, we need to orientate more around safety because we've had some safety things. So we want to celebrate and recognize and appreciate people who are demonstrating a greater effort towards safety because that was the thing. Or it's sales, or it's innovation, or it's teamwork, or it's leadership, or it's some combination. It's that first you've got to get something in place that the employees believe is credible. Not some old fakakta program that it's like, yeah, I think my grandmother used to sort of participate in versions like that. And the number of companies that are still doing these sort of anachronistic type initiatives, it's like, why are you doing that? It's so out of touch. You may be damaging yourself even more by the fact that you're continuing to do that. Get the program in place, assess whether they're using it, and then you bring the finessing of Paul and that level of expertise in and teaching how to people to then use it correctly and orientate towards things and coaching things. You know, for some reason, if you think about all our trajectories, when we were young, we used to get celebrated and appreciated, you know, school, gold stars, and the programming. And as we went through university and then into work, for some reason, the whole thing rotated and everything became about criticism. So it started with celebrations and achievements and appreciation and acknowledgement. And that inspired us to want to go further and work harder and get more gold stars and be celebrated and be the top student of them, et cetera, et cetera. And then we joined the workforce and everything is like, yeah, that's really shit, right? And you're not doing
This
it
is
right.
HBO, you can say it.
Sorry, thank you. I apologize. You asked me to be more careful. Anyway, so those dimensions, you know, Bruce, that you talked about, and the finessing of appreciation, you know, versus recognition and the nuances therein. Absolutely, that's the next sort of level of finessing the sort of cultural experience and the kind of framework you want to have in place. But there's so much at the fundamental level, which is, you know, doing it, being credible, being consistent, having the CEO appear as a message periodically, sort of saying, hey, we see you out there and I know you're all working hard. It's so many dimensional aspects and then measurable. And then once you get to that, you begin to refine it and it changes its focus over time based on what's happening macroeconomically or what's happening within the business and the organization.
And by the way, what you're talking about is a systematic approach, right? But being a culture cannot be faked. You can, and by the way, nothing any of you gentlemen will do if you have if you're not building a sound culture, it's just a waste of time.
Right.
But
Bruce, if
go
I
ahead.
can just add one other thing just about appreciation, because Michael's comments remind me that culturally, when we hear appreciation, we tend to think about words. You know, we say thanks, we give compliments. That's good. But in our research with over 450,000 employees across the world, words is chosen by people at less than half the time of the way they want to be shown appreciation. Rewards is another way, and that's less than 10%. And cross-culturally, it goes way down to 5, 3, 1%. And in there, we have other ways of quality time, which is either time with your manager, or for younger employees, that more and more it's hanging out with their peers. or an act of service of when they're, finding a deadline, what can you do to help them out to make it happen and reach it? And then there's the one that Americans tend to freak out about is physical touch, which actually across culturally is more important of, the warmth of shaking a hand or, putting a hand on your shoulder or whatever is appropriate. But just focusing on words, if we just think about appreciation that way, we're still going to miss the boat that appreciation is really sort of a fuller, multilingual kind of way of communicating value to people.
And in my view, and Darwin, we're going to get to you because this is now we're getting toward the end here. In my view, these issues that the two of you are talking about are going to be much more valued and appreciated when companies recognize this, that there's actually an impact on the organization's success.
Sure.
I keep getting back to that human capital factor. If you're ignoring that, Mr. Ms. CEO, you are basically, not fulfilling your fiduciary responsibility to the organization because you're leaving value behind. So, Darwin, let's get to that. I see all these companies on LinkedIn. Oh, if you use my widget, turnover will go down. You use my widget and referrals will go up, and they make all these vague claims, but in the medical profession, you can't do that, right? You have to research it. No, 89% of the time this works and 11% of the time, good luck. I mean, you have to have metrics, impact in engineering, metrics, impact. If you're going to buy a building, cash flow. But somehow, and companies spend a lot of money on recognition. I know major Fortune 500 companies that spend $20 million a year on rewards, right? And so, Darwin, the old excuse, I can't measure it, that's ridiculous. Could you kind of give us some ideas about how impact can be measured that most companies have the data for right now?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different metrics that you can use. We've defined hundreds of them that you can use, but most importantly are those impacts that look at the value, the human capital value, how much is being added by each employee. What does that look like? What's the ROI of your programs? Let's look at that and see what the impact of that is. But most importantly, I think, are the cost impacts. What is the cost? What costs are we looking at? The cost of replacement, the cost of reduction. What kind of costs are we talking about? Because most of these programs are sold on the idea, or at least the CEO is always asking, what is the cost of this program? It's always sold based on cost. And the reality is it's not really the cost. I'm not putting together a program that's a cost reduction program. This is not what it's all about. We're not going to reduce employees' salaries because we gave them a recognition program. I'm just not doing it. What we're going to do is we're going to actually talk about the impact of the organization when we put a cost initiative in place that looks at the value of their job in terms of how much I pay them, so their compensation is correctly created, and then we're looking at the holistic approach of what I want them to be doing and what I want them to be thinking about in terms of the recognition and rewards and all those other programs that I put together. And I'm going to look at that and say, okay, what is the cost impact of that to our bottom line? Are we getting value because our employees like to come to work versus those employees that hate to come to work? How is that changing our methods? And so usually what we do is we look at the organization itself and say, okay, from this organization, what are the important impacts that we're trying to accomplish with the organization? So we always start with the strategic part of the organization and look from there and say, what are we trying to accomplish with this organization? We're paying people for a reason, right? We don't pay them just because we want to pay people. We pay them because there's an impact. The impact is we can continue to pay them because we're actually making money as a company, and we can continue to have them as employees, and we want them to be employees. We want them to stick around. So how do we measure that? And that's when we come up with all these different metrics that we use. And we might be looking at revenue factors. We might be looking at expense factors, even in some cases. Cost of invested capital, all of those metrics that we have developed, we might look at those to determine what is the best from the strategic standpoint of the organization, what they're trying to accomplish. And then we come back to, all right, how is it that our employees are helping us get there? Oh, really? They're the ones that actually get us there? Okay, now let's look at all the programs that we have in place. And are they actually making our employees or allowing our employees to be better at accomplishing those goals? And very transparent about that, about the goals for the organization. This is what the organization's here for. We're not a daycare. We're not here just to have people and treat them kindly and have them go home happy. This is not what we're here for. We're here to actually make money as an organization. But that means we want to keep our people. And you can't keep your people if you're not treating them the way they want to be treated and the way that they want to be recognized and appreciated. And all those things come into play because that's what we actually need to do. But we can measure that. And we can absolutely measure that through metrics, through looking at what are the strategic important factors for that organization. And then we can start from there. So there really isn't one answer. I can't just say this is the
Go ahead.
answer. There's multiple answers.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Darren.
Go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry.
I was just going to give two practical examples that I know have been researched. One is for construction and manufacturing places that when people feel valued and appreciated, the number of days lost due to injury on the job industries goes down, right? So not only you have the medical costs associated, but the loss of production. Same thing in office-related settings. When people feel valued and appreciated, the number of days that people call in sick goes down. And especially when you're in in a law firm where you have a law clerk that they have to do work for the lawyer. I mean, it upsets, or a medical setting, it upsets the workflow. So those kinds of things that you may not think about it initially, but those impact the performance of the company.
Well, folks,
and those
just
are the
to think,
strategies that we really want to look at for the organization and say, like you said, a healthcare organization, your nurses call in sick and, you need them. They've got to be there in order for this thing to work, this medical profession to work. They have to be there. So reducing that has got to be one of the strategic advantages of this organization, and that you have to look at and say, we have to reduce that. How do we do that? Well, this is one good way to do that. Let's measure that and measure it over time. And then you can come back to that CEO and say, see, this stuff is working. This is what has been working. This is what's changed. This is what's moved the needle. And the needle is the strategy that they're trying to provide.
and this isn't just employee engagement, as Michael was referring. No, it's turnover. How many people left? And what did that cost you? And you can estimate that. Don't tell me you can't. How many referrals did we get? My son works for a company, gets paid $4,000 if he brings in a referral, because it's very hard to get engineers, and he's earned $4,000 a couple of times. What are we doing? What about attendance? What is attendance costing us? Then it becomes viewed as an investment. I spent $700,000 with Michael Levy's company, and we were able to track $4 million in retained employees, additional referrals, less absenteeism, less accidents. Do you think the investment is a good investment if I've spent 700,000 and got a $400 million return? That's what's going to get the CEO's attention, I believe. So my last question to all three of you, and I'm going to start with you, Michael. I'm going to make a hypothesis that the recognition business isn't mature at all. They say it's mature. It's been around since Maritz and O.C. Tanner started making jewelry in 1850 and selling it to corporations. But I would argue that recognition is still a thing. It is still a cost center. And that when companies really get to know the research of the human capital factor, there's an opportunity for it to be viewed as an investment. So, Michael, do you think that hypothesis correct? Is that if this industry ever becomes viewed as a profit center, that it's not a mature industry. Am I nuts?
No, it's still juvenile as measured by what it's striving to achieve, what it's being measured by, and the impact it has, and is still stuck somewhat in some arcane business model constructs that say, I need to be selling things, whether it's gift cards or prizes or things with logos on it, and that my business model is based on that, as opposed to it being a keystone centerpiece of an overarching employee experience strategy that includes, how do I communicate with my people? How do I acknowledge them? How do I make them feel that they're seen and noticed? How do I inspire them to give of their best, as well as inspire them into certain directions? So at the point in time where recognition is seen as an enabler for a series of business outcomes, it will start to mature. Whether that happens under the recognition banner is a question mark. I think it is probably under a banner of the employee experience, of which then benefits folks can contribute, retention folks, talent acquisition folks can contribute, because the one thing that employees all without exception like consistently is they like to be noticed, they like to be appreciated, they like to be recognized, and that then becomes an enabler of a series of other, tactical objectives and opportunities. So the industry as selling, things to people under the guise of recognition is possibly, fading or sort of bumping along, as a benefit that, hey, if we need to cut some costs, we'll sort of cut that. The opportunity for it to be a transformative enabler is just beginning. As we realize that irrespective of the macro circumstances, employees are still the center of the organization, particularly in developed service-orientated markets. So what is their experience? Pay being a component, obviously a very important one, it's why we come, but people don't think about pay when they're going to work. And they don't think about pay when they're about to go, hey, I should leave. It's 10 to 5, nobody will bloody notice, versus, hey, I really want to kick ass on this thing. They're not thinking about pay. So what are they thinking about? Well, they're thinking about, do I feel inspired? Do I like this place? Do I get appreciated? Do people notice if I work extra, or if I bolted, who cares? If I'm sick and have a few extra days, does anybody notice? Does anybody care? Or, and so that's to some of Paul and Darwin's, earlier points. Recognition is a big enabler for creating cultures where the employee experience is elevated, and then the business gets the corresponding outcomes of a workforce that goes, I'm inspired. I want to do great. I'm going to give you my discretionary effort, because every employee has a pile of discretionary effort at their disposal. It's just whether they employ it or not.
And most of the time they don't. We pretty much know. Paul, you know what I wonder? I wonder, most of these, and this is not an attack on anybody, of course, or everyone tries and cares. But if you look at where the recognition companies come from, it's either jewelry, plaques, awards, or technology. I don't know whether these companies really have the expertise. Do they, in many cases, have the expertise to address people from a holistic, total quality management standpoint? And to Michael's point, are they almost a little bit prejudiced because they're selling a predetermined solution? We all know you could put in any technology in the world. I don't care whether it's customer relationship management, ERP systems. If your people aren't fully engaged in the technology, it won't even work. So, Paul, do you think that part of our problem is that our solution providers, they're selling things when what we really need is a culture, harmonization of interests, etc.?
I think it's part of the problem for sure. I mean, that we have a sector of companies that have, made good money over the years, doing what they do, and they'd like to continue to do that. I mean, that's human nature. But the fact is, we also have to look at the data coming back to us, that the results that we say we want and are, doing this for, aren't happening. And so, somebody with intellectual honesty would, question that and say, maybe we aren't hitting the mark. What's interesting to me, coming from the appreciation point of view, is when we first started, there was questions like, is this too soft? Is this too interpersonal? And, I mean, clearly we're not going to hit construction people or manufacturing or mining or law enforcement. And it's been interesting to me that there's been no industry, including like prisons and jails and everything that you think of sort of tough guy or tough people vocations, that there are places that invest in their people regardless of the type of work or industry, and that the people respond. I mean, we were written about in the New York Times about our work with a mining company in South Dakota, and it's like, I mean, you wouldn't think about that as being a hotbed of appreciation, but it really fits to the human potential. I think, I the there's multiple issues. I mean, one is people have been successful in some way and they're trying to continue it. And also with tech companies, I mean, as you and I work together, I mean, they're sort of scared of dealing with personal training and stuff. I mean, they don't see it as scalable as much. And so there's some biased perspectives. So there's some different pieces that go together to create the challenge.
Well, Darwin, you're going to get the last word. It seems to be the interesting thing is that this is an entire industry that focuses on what it wants to sell rather than what the customer really needs, right? Customers. Now, you told me something in an earlier conversation that in many cases, if a CEO has a 50% turnover rate, they don't blink. That's
Mm.
okay. Why not?
In some
50%.
cases, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so let me ask you this, Darwin, from the standpoint of a human capital analytics and compensation expert, or expert, somebody with a ton of experience doing it, do you think there's that my contention that the quote recognition field, whatever, and to Michael's point, what do we call it? That might be another issue, is really not a mature market, that it is still selling things when the real opportunity is to sell performance enhancement.
Yeah, I think a lot of that I think is because when you think of some of these recognition programs, they speak to the emotional side of folks. And the CEOs look at that and go, oh, we can't measure that. It's emotional, it's cultural, we can't measure that. So what do? They go back to cost. So it's always about cost with them because we can't measure it. The problem is they don't think about it in a holistic standpoint that says, okay, we actually can measure what this is going to impact us because it will have an impact. Emotional aspects of a human being have as much impact as all the rest of the impact of a human being. There is that part of us that plays into what we do on a day-to-day basis, and it is measurable. And I don't think that this industry will be seen as responsive or as mature until they get to the point where the CEO is, when you show them a product, they go, product, okay, well, how is this going to impact the bottom line? And when they first start with the strategies that they're trying to accomplish first in their minds, questioning it, that it's not until we get to that point where I have more than one out of a million CEOs ask me that question that I'm going to get to the point where I say, well, you know what, we're maturing in this industry because we're actually looking at it from a different perspective than this is going to cost me money. How are we going to save money on this? Because this is a cost factor. It's like, no,
Well,
actually,
folks, to conclude, because we are out of time, where things are really going to change, I think, is going to be at the securities analyst meeting. When the securities analysts at the annual meeting start asking the CEO, what's your human capital factor? What's your turnover? What's your customer average revenue per customer? What's your average cost per customer? What's your average revenue per employee? What's your human capital ROI? What's your human capital value add? These are all metrics, folks, that we will be explaining upcoming in reports, thanks to the input of people like these. And we do have a very diverse group, by the way, of people contributing to this. But they're metrics that directly affect the bottom line. And I think that's where we're going as an industry. And the big challenge, Paul, is that these, just like you said, these tech companies are founded by venture capital companies. They don't want to hear professional services. They don't want to hear that it's going to take experts to actually go in and plan this program. They want scale, 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 scale. So I don't know, Michael, you make a very good point. I'm not sure whether the current players in this industry are going to be the ones to really reign in the new era where we're focusing on value creation instead of platitudes. But that's why we're in business, folks, to see what happens. And Michael, I cannot thank you enough for taking your time today to share your expertise. And again, this is not just going to be on a show. You don't have to read, if you don't want to watch the show, there'll be a great article summary coming up as well. Paul, thank you so much once again, and both of you for volunteering, because it's a volunteer job to help us with these impact metrics. And Darwin, thank you so much for giving the expert, I should say the experienced viewpoint of somebody that's outside of this industry but understands how companies view people. Well, so thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you next time.
You too, Bruce. Thanks for stirring the pot.
Yeah, thank
Always
you.
a pleasure.